helpful to formalize these things to a degree and say, I'm going to try to always do sort of these three things as we go. So, just to get started. So, this is a great quote that I pulled out of the Understanding by Design book that's probably hard to read, so I'll just actually read it, which is this idea that hands-on learning does not necessarily mean minds-on learning. It's a mistake that we sometimes make. And we have students doing incredible projects, and they're really engaged, but the error of activity-oriented design might be called hands-on without being minds-on. Engaging experiences that lead only accidentally, if at all, to insider achievement. They're led to think that learning is the activity, instead of seeing that the learning comes from being asked to consider the meaning of the activity. So the idea is that we have these great projects that we're doing here, but there's a little push we sometimes need to give students to connect it to bigger ideas, to say, that thing you just did, that discovery you just made, do you see how that connects to these bigger questions we've been asking? Or how does that connect to these bigger questions we've been asking? That's what we're going to talk about today. So here's our main goals for the rest of the day. We're going to identify different ways to ensure what we're doing is minds-on. We're going to look at our own classes and find out where we're succeeding and creating opportunities for meaningful student learning. We're going to look at our own classes and think about where we can put in more opportunities for that kind of work. And then we're going to develop a toolbox of strategies to do minds-on learning, like Tom said. All right. So here are the three big ideas that we recommend using. And again, there's a bunch more, but here's three that we think are solid. Learning goals are made explicit for students and connected to a clear challenge. It's not a secret what you're doing with the kids. You want them to know, why are we doing this today? Two, that the big picture is clear throughout the activity with a constant back and forth dialogue between what's happening in the moment and what's happening on the whole. It's a lot of words that will make sense in a minute. And then time is always set aside for self-reflection and connections between the work and the goals at the end of the class. Even if it's just a little bit of time, that check-in, so that you're wrapping it up for students and helping them see how this connects to the big picture. All right, so we're going to talk about one lesson from Bubble Bonanza, which is a class that we ran last session that Lisa Blake, who's unfortunately not here today, did. That I fully admit was cherry-picked for this. Both the lesson on paper and the work that Lisa does in the classroom really lends itself to this kind of work. I think some of the work you're doing is a little more challenging, but I cherry-picked this one because I think it really helps illustrate. So this particular day, the kids are making bubble wands. So they've been using bubbles to study all kinds of things about engineering, about construction, about shapes. It's this really great curriculum. So when you look in the curriculum, you as the teacher are given these two key learning goals for the day. The kids are going to learn bubble wands can be made from many different kinds of materials, and the material used to make the wand will affect the kind of bubbles that they make. And the activity is they're using pipe cleaners and paper towel tubes and mesh, straw, strings, rubber bands, all this stuff to make wands and then test them out, right? That's what they're doing in the classroom. And in Lisa's class, they were just all really fun. They were all over the place working in small teams, working individually, and she and her para, the instructors, were just floating around, checking in with students, providing supports where they could, and asking questions. All right. So that's basically what's happening. So we're going to go through those three big ideas looking at this class. So number one, learning goals are made explicit for students connected to a clear challenge. So one way you can do this is you write in a very visible place. And some of you won't have the opportunity to write because you're out in the world, so you state this. But if you can't write it in a visible place, you can always reference it. That's a good thing. Something like, so here's the questions we're going to answer today. What can we use to make a bubble wand? And how does the stuff we use to make the wands affect the bubbles those wands make, right? So you might start the class by reading those goals out loud together, asking if students have questions about those goals, and then saying, well, what do you think the answers to this is? What do you think your answers are going to be? And if you can, note down those answers so that you can tie it back later, saying, so this is what you predicted, did that end up being true? So already in this class, you're embedding a little bit of scientific method. They're making a hypothesis, and they're going to test it, and they're going to look at it in the end, right? So again, these things actually are very straightforward. It's just really take the time, take the 2 minutes to make it clear what you're doing with the students today so they're partners in this learning. So the next one, big picture is clear throughout the activity with a constant back and forth. This is probably the most challenging one because you got your kids going and you're trying to manage behavior, and especially if they're really engaged and clearly getting a lot out of it, you don't want to mess with that magic. But there's little ways you can check in to sort of make sure they're connecting it to those big questions. So things like quick share-outs. So let's say Lisa's in the classroom and she's got a student, and that student has just made stop and listen for 1 second, and everyone stops and says, tell us what just happened. And the student explains what happens, and maybe she takes a minute to say, has anyone else tried something like that? What do you think is causing that? Just these quick check-ins to see, to connect that idea to the larger group, to say this discovery the student made, make sure that everyone gets to share in that discovery, right? With individual students, you can change the challenge. If they're really succeeding, see if you can change the given circumstances and say, well, what would happen if you do something the exact opposite way? What would happen if you use these materials that you, from the beginning, decided wouldn't work, right? The same thing with the success. Who's having a problem? Like if a student is not having success, bring that to the whole group and say, so this is what this student's struggling with, or better yet, have them present that. And then ask who has a suggestion, particularly if it's tied to something they're already doing. And then throughout that, always refer back to those goals you've written up on the board. Always help them see how this connects to the big picture, right? And then the last one is that time's always set aside for self-reflection. So in the last 10 minutes, you come together as a whole group and you revisit those questions. And when the students give answers to those questions, always try to get them to use examples of what they did today, as opposed to, well, this is this kind of one, works this way. Really get them to say, how did you discover that? Can you show us that one? Can you demonstrate? The activity can continue through this. But it's really connecting what they're doing to those big ideas. Ask students things like, what surprised you? What was unexpected? Ask what questions they still have. That's a really, really great way to draw this out. And then try to tie it back to overall learning goals that you might have. So for example, in Engineering is Elementary, or in Bubble Bonanza, one of the things they have is this engineering design process poster. So that's like the big thing for the whole class. So if you have something like that, tying it back into that, saying, so how does this connect back to the engineering design process? So again, almost everything I'm saying probably feels a little obvious, but there's something about making a formal decision to say, all right, every day I'm going to make sure I'm making my goals explicit. I'm going to try to do these check-ins where we're drawing back to those goals at least 2 or 3 times, and I will always make sure we have time for self-reflection. Can make the difference between that really rich activity landing in a more self-reflective way for the students so they really understand what they were doing, and maybe slipping away a little bit. Okay? So that's it.